That is a responsibility of the Palestinian Authority and the local Muslim Palestinians. It is nothing to do with the state of Israel. And I've seen this lie come up for many years, and it's now megaphoned by people, including some people I used to like and respect, who are knowingly or unknowingly pushing an outright anti-Semitic lie.
I'm curious whether you think that Mamdani resembles something that we've talked about, obviously, over the past many years, about the horseshoe effect, about the extremes of right and left coming together in a way, or does he represent something fundamentally different? Or is he something much more extreme than that? Just given that how many of his policies seem to be not critiques of the fact that things, affordability crises and things like that, but going far beyond that, particularly, the idea, in his platform and written with allies within his movement of paying for free gender surgeries for people to fly into the city from all across the country and then be housed in order to get them. I mean, that's not the kind of thing that I think people mean when they say horseshoe theory.
Very strange priority to have, isn't it, for a city in which an innocent citizen can be, for instance, set on light and burned to death on the subway. Or it's a weird priority in a city which has a homelessness crisis and so many challenges and problem. And it's an odd thing to think, the way we solve this is by mutilating the genitals of children from other states. Again, we'll see if that goes down well with the voters. I'd be surprised if it does, but not entirely. There's a very strange radical left platform that always prioritizes the same things. You can completely predict their policies. Of course, they'll say this about trans. Of course, they'll not be able to condemn a phrase like globalize the Intifada. I mean, just think about that for a moment. There have been these struggle sessions where Mamdani has tried to explain why globalize the Intifada is not a bad phrase, means something other than it means. The words don't mean what the words mean. But just consider for a moment that, Intifada, there have been two in Israel in recent decades. Intifada is a violent struggle in which, among other things, American students were blown up at the cafeteria of an Israeli university whilst they were buying and enjoying a morning coffee and a break from there. The Intifada meant a suicide bomber walking in to a student cafe and detonating and killing Americans. And you think globalizing that's a good idea? How will New Yorkers feel if they actually ever felt that? Like, if you actually globalize what I just described, it means you support the idea of people going into downtown coffee shops or universities and leaving bombs there and blowing up everyone for the crime of having coffee. That's what globalize the Intifada means. You think that's hard to condemn? You think you should be hot for gender transition and also hot for suicide bombing in New York cafes? Really? Those are your priorities? Those are your principles? This is, unfortunately, what we've seen in the election of Mamdani is the normalization of rhetoric and ideas that used to be just way out from the permitted center or mainstream of American public life, American politics. My most recent book on democracies and death cults is my first-hand account of the war in the Middle East. It's an account of the atrocities of the 7th of October and the war that has resulted from it, which I think I've seen about as much of it as any independent journalist has been able to in Israel, in Gaza, in Lebanon. And I feel very strongly about the matter, and I feel that the extraordinary number of lies and untruths that have been told about Israel are appalling. It's quite easy for somebody to fall into the lie, say, that Israel is an apartheid society, if they've never been to Israel and have simply been told that by Islamists online and various types of bigot. It's quite easy to see how somebody might fall into that lie that Israel is an apartheid state, like South Africa until the 1980s or 1990s. And however, if you've been, and you've seen Jews and Muslims and Druze and Christians all living side by side in the same city, you would find it harder to make such a reprehensible smear against the Jewish state. That it would fall away in your mind as a smear and an allegation if you had gone there with your own eyes. Sorry that people don't see that.
I grew up in the American South. I was born in Mississippi and then South Carolina. Then we moved to rural Virginia. I did not meet a Jewish person, I don't think, until I was 13 or 14 years old. My family had strong pro-Israel opinions nonetheless. It is an odd thing for me to see the party that now, has become essentially the exclusive, the coalition that has become the exclusive really place for American evangelical Christians. Certainly it is, being a practicing Christian is an indication now of where you fall on the political spectrum. And yet you have these online voices, some of them quite prominent with prominent followings, who claim their Christianity as being, central to or important to them, who have taken on an increasingly anti-Israel position, one that is outspoken, sometimes bigoted, very often based on incorrect assumptions, and I would say quite frequently completely morally backwards, in my opinion. Why do you think we've seen this develop on certain pockets of the right in recent years, and how real do you actually believe it is as a development?
Oh, I think it's real, and it's been coming for a long time because there have been concerted efforts to push lies as a narrative. Take one that understandably irks people on the right, and particularly, I suppose, the Christian right, which I've seen growing for a long time, which is the claim that the Christian population of Bethlehem has been diminishing and dwindling because of Israeli occupation. I have seen prominent right-wing talk show hosts and podcasters in the US push this. If it were true, it would be a very serious, unpleasant thing and a very serious allegation against the state of Israel. The problem is, as it were, for those people, is it's not true. It's flat out false. The Christian population of Bethlehem has been falling for years. And again, having been there many times, I can tell you, and having spoken to the Christians that remain in Bethlehem, the reason is the local Muslim population and the Palestinian Authority that rules over them, the PA, which has made sure systematically for decades that a city that was once had a thriving Christian population has been seeing the falling away, the eradication, the flight of Christians in Bethlehem from that place. That is the responsibility of the Palestinian Authority and the local Muslim Palestinians. It is nothing to do with the state of Israel. And I've seen this lie come up for many years, and it's now megaphoned by people, including some people I used to like and respect, who are knowingly or unknowingly pushing an outright anti-Semitic lie, which plays into some of the oldest anti-Semitic lies of all. It's got all of the whiffs and the connotations of the Jews being, Christ's killers and all of that sort of thing. It's not surprising that this sort of counterfactual, non-factual stuff is pushed from the Palestinian side. It is surprising when formerly respectable broadcasters and others push this lie, because they are either doing so knowingly, in which case they are just being anti-Semitic and trying to push a libel on the Jewish state, or they're totally ignorant. And I leave it up to viewers to guess which of those two things it could ever be.
Brief time that we have left, I want to ask you about a larger question regarding the defense of Jews in America. It seems like increasingly, given the fear that actually exists in some communities across the country, that it is incumbent upon a lot of people to be more outspoken in the defense of them and their freedom from having to be confronted by actual fear in some of these communities. We've seen the clashes that have happened, not just on campuses, but elsewhere as well. What do you believe our obligation is as neighbors in this moment to American Jews who feel very much that they are being targeted and, in some cases even physically attacked, and sadly in one case killed, in others as well. Yes, it just seems to me that there is an obligation on the part of neighbors to stand up for them. But there's also, I think, a real hesitancy, to get back to our initial point, on the backlash that comes when common people who do not have platforms, do not have resources, do not have connections, basically have to come forward and defend their neighbors and friends and those in their community from some of the most radical and confrontational forces that exist on the American left.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that non-Jews in a moment like this should express solidarity and consistency. And one way I've put it, I mentioned this on Democracies and Death Cults. Consider the fact that after the 7th of October, which as many people have said is the biggest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, consider the fact that there was not one anti-Hamas protest in any major city in America, or indeed in the West. However, from the evening of the 7th of October, student groups at Harvard were releasing joint statements saying that they blamed Israel. On the 8th of October, 2023, as I recount in the opening of the book, I went to watch this protest in Times Square, which supported the massacre as it was going on.
Yes.
In this situation, all you have to do is to translate any or all of the things that have happened in America to Jewish Americans in the last almost 2 years now, and just think what it would be if it had happened to any other minority. We've had Jewish students chased across campus by mobs calling for them to go back to Poland. We've had Jewish students harassed. We've had Jewish students having repeated death threats, groups calling for them to be Hamas's next target. We've seen 2 beautiful young people walking out of a Jewish museum in Washington, D.C., and being gunned down in the street. Now, in this situation, imagine if it was any other minority that this had happened to. Imagine if Black American students, for instance, had for 2 years had to put up with virulent racists chasing them across campuses, telling them to go back to Africa or any other vile phrase. Imagine if Black Americans had repeatedly been targeted for death, threatened with death, and much more for no other reason than for being Black. What would decent people do of left and right? They would stand up for our brothers and sisters. That is all you need to do, whether it is a Jewish minority or any other minority. And it is staggering to me that very often the same people who have spent recent years saying things like, if you criticize anything to do with trans issues and children being trans, that you are
putting their lives at risk.
You are putting their lives at risk. You're making them kill themselves, or you're making them get genocided. That the same people are openly calling for genocide of Jews, globalize the Intifada, and much more. This is reprehensible. It should be pushed to the farthest extremes of American public life. So all I say is solidarity and consistency. If people can hold to that, we'll do okay.